Hello, everyone. Hello. Right. I think they're just trying to get to the lights. There's a lot of you here. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you have never been here before? Okay, please follow us on social media and sign up for our mailing list. And that's all I'm going to say because let's get on with this thing. I want to say a special thank you to our sponsors for this evening, the Consulate General of Brazil in New York. Woohoo! They will be feeding you some tasty treats after this. The Brazil Lab at Princeton University, and they're joining us via our YouTube stream. And New Directions Publishing. All right, let me introduce our guest. Katrina Dodson translated part of Macunaíma upstairs in our writing room here at the Center for Fiction. Her translation of The Complete Stories by Clarice Lispector won the 2016 PEN Translation Prize and other awards. Born in Andhra Pradesh, India, Madhu Kaza is a writer, translator, artist, and educator based in New York. John Keene wrote the introduction to this new translation. He is a MacArthur Fellow and Distinguished Professor of English and African American Studies at Rutgers University, Newark. His most recent poetry collection, Punks, received the 2022 National Book Award for Poetry and other awards. And so this is the part that is very exciting for us bookish people. Musician and composer Iara joins us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Her most recent album, Oriki, was nominated for a 2022 Latin Grammy, and she will be performing songs from her 2008 album, Macunaíma Opera Tupi, based on Mario de Andrade's novel. Iara is joined by Felipe Fernandez on beats and synth bass, and Leticia Salguero on percussion. The band will be playing tomorrow night at New Blue in Manhattan, so definitely check them out there too. And without further ado, welcome them to the stage.
Fundo. Is it working? 1 second. No fundo do Mato Virgem nasceu Macunaíma. Hello, thanks everyone for being here. Okay? No fundo do Mato Virgem nasceu Macunaíma, herói da nossa gente. In the depths of the virgin forest was born Macunaíma, hero of our people. So goes the famous first line of one of the most famous books in Brazilian literature, Mário de Andrade's 1928 modernist epic, Macunaíma, the hero with no character. It's often compared to James Joyce's Ulysses for its experimental language that mixes colloquial regional Brazilian Portuguese with Tupi, the major indigenous language, and other languages somewhat integrated into Brazil's national language. But most Brazilian readers wouldn't recognize all the indigenous words, which often occur in lists of flora and fauna. So the effect of the book is both familiarity and strangeness, and that was something that I was trying to hold on to and balance in my translation of the book. Macunaíma, many of you have seen the cover show, tells the adventures of Macunaíma and his two brothers as they leave the northern Amazon and journey all over Brazil in search of a lost amulet, magical amulet. The hero is based on an indigenous trickster demigod from the indigenous Piman people of the northern Amazon, but Andrade, a queer mixed-race author with African heritage on both sides, reinvents Macunaíma as a member of a legendary Black indigenous tribe who at one point turns white after bathing in magic Catholic saint water. You're going to have to read the book to hear how that happens. Thus, he embodies the storied three races of Brazil. It was my dream to bring musician and composer Iara Rennó from Brazil for this event. Because she has been adapting Macunaíma into her music and stage performances for 20 years. So, we've kind of lived this parallel trajectory of going really deep with the book and translating into music. So before the panel discussion, we're going to share with you some excerpts from my translation with songs that Iara adapted from the same sections of the book. And so our first selection comes from the opening chapter titled Macunaíma. In the depths of the virgin forest was born Macunaíma, hero of our people. He was jet black and sun to fear of the night. There came a moment when the silence grew so great, listening to the murmuring hiurariquera, that the native Tapanumas woman birthed an ugly child. That child is the one they called Macunaíma. Even as a boy, he did bewildering things. First off, he went more than 6 years without talking. If they coaxed him to talk, he'd holler, "Ah, just so lazy. Ay, que preguiça," and not a word more. He kept to a corner of the family maloca, perched on a platform of pashiuba palm, watching the others work, especially his two brothers, Manape, the geezer, and Jige, in the prime of manhood. For fun, he'd pick the heads off sauva ants. All he did was lie around, but if he ever set eyes on money, Makunaima would toddle for a penny. And he'd perk up whenever the family went to bathe in the river, all naked together. He'd spend the whole time diving underwater, and the women would squeal in delight on account of those guayamum crabs said to inhabit the freshwater there. Back at the family Mokambu, if a girl came up to cuddle, Makunaima would stick his hand on her charms, the girl would jump back. As for the males, he'd spit in their faces. Nevertheless, he respected the elders and wholeheartedly joined in the murua, the porase, the tore, the bakororo, the quikwikogi, all the religious dances of the tribe. Andrade. Oh, is it open? Tá me falando? Ouvindo? Mardi Andrade was a poet and a conservatory-trained pianist and music professor, as well as a self-trained folklorist and ethnomusicologist. So this book, which he called a rhapsody, is full of songs based on rural, Amazonian, Afro-Brazilian folk songs that he collected, so it was important for me to translate them as songs. I'd sometimes invent melodies to make sure they would actually work as songs, and actually, Iara, I sent her my translations, and she was able to set some of my English lyrics to melodies that she had invented already for the same songs in Portuguese. So this one is from a lullaby that the hero's brothers sing to cheer him up. He's weeping, weeping, weeping because he's lost his lover. And in my head it goes, Aku chipuru, olendai sound sleep, to Macunaíma, who does nothing but weep. And Iara's version. And this next snippet is from a farewell song at the very end of the story. It's a funny book, but it gets very melancholy. And there's a word in the song that I kept the same. Tapera is from the Tupi name for swallow, the bird. And I'm still working out the melody on this one, but I think I'm just going to use Iara's for now.
Let us say goodbye, Tapera, like the swallow on your breast. Tapera, took wing to the sky. Tapera, a lone feather in the nest.
So this next episode comes from chapter 4, Boyuna Moon, in which a waterfall named Naipi tells her story. It's based on a Guarani origin story of Iguazu Falls along Brazil's southwestern border. But Andrade also mixes in the mythical Amazonian Boyuna water snake, as well as origin stories of how the moon came to be from the indigenous Kaxinawa or Hunikuan and Paimon peoples. So Macunaíma and his brothers, they come up to the waterfall and they ask her what's wrong, because she's weeping. Can't you see that my name is Naipi and I am the daughter of the Tushawa named Mesho Meshoichiki, which in my language means big cat crouching. I was the prettiest of maidens, and all the neighboring Tushawas wanted to sleep in my hammock and taste of my body, more languid than the flowering Imbirosu. Yet whenever one came, I'd bite and kick, eager to test his strength. And none could withstand it, and they'd go away so mournful. My tribe was enslaved to Kape, the Boyuna water snake, who lived deep in a cavern in the company of Sauva ants. During the season when the ipe trees along the river bloomed yellow with flowers, the Boyuna would come to our taba and choose a virgin girl to sleep with in her underground cave full of skeletons. When my body began weeping blood, pleading for a man's strength to serve, the Swinara owl sang at first light in the jarina palms of my tejupar. Kape came and chose me. The ipes along the riverbank were glimmering with yellow, and all their flowers fell upon the sobbing shoulders of the young Titsate, one of my father's warriors. A great sadness had come marching into our taba like a line of sakasaya ants and devoured even the silence. When the wise old page pulled the night back out from its hole, Titsate gathered all the little flowers nearby and brought them to the hammock on my last night of freedom. And then I bit Titsate. Blood gushed from the young man's wounded wrist, but he made no fuss at all, furiously moaning, making love, filling my mouth with flowers so I couldn't bite anymore. Titsate leapt into the hammock, and Naipi served Titsate.
Que me chamo Naipi e sou filha do Tuxalá. Meshoichiki, minha tribo era escrava da boiona capê. Todos os Tuxauas desejavam dormir na minha rede, provar meu corpo mais mole que Mirosu. Meu corpo mais mole, meu corpo. Quando meu corpo chorou sangue, pedindo força de homem pra servir, a Suinara cantou manhãzinha nas jarinas de meu tejupá. Quando meu corpo chorou sangue, pedindo força pra servir, a Suinara cantou manhãzinha nas jarinas de meu tejupá. Veio o capê e me escolheu. Os ipês de beira-rio relampeavam e todas as flores caíram nos ombros do moço. Titsate ajuntou as florzinhas e veio com elas pra rede da minha. O
crazy, mingling streaming blood with the little ipe flowers. My champion carried me on his shoulders, tossed me into his ipegara moored in a place hidden among the aturias, and sped like an arrow out to the waters of the raging river, fleeing the boyuna snake. The next day, when the wise old page tucked the night back into its hole, Capet went to fetch me and found the bloody hammock empty. She roared and dashed off to find us. She was coming closer, coming closer. We could hear her roaring close by, closer still, right up close, till finally the waters of the raging river reared up, churning the boyuna's body. Titsate was so dead tired he could paddle no more, bleeding all the while from the bite on his wrist. That's why we couldn't escape. Capet caught me, spun me round, put me to the egg test. It worked, and the boyuna saw that I had already served Titsate. She was so full of wrath that she wished to put an end to this world. I don't know. She turned me into this rock and hurled Titsate onto the river's shore, transformed into a plant. It's that one right over there, down there, right there. He's that ever so lovely floating murure you can see, waving in the water at me. His purple flowers are the drops of blood from the bite, frozen solid by my cold, cold waterfall. Capet dwells down below, always checking to see whether that boy really did play around with me. Indeed he did, and I'll go on weeping over this rock till the end of what has no end, aching so from never again serving my warrior Titsate. She stopped. Her tears splashed onto Makunaima's knees, and he shook with sobs. If that boyuna ever showed up, I'd kill her. Right then a colossal roar was heard, and Capet came surging out the water. And Capet was the boyuna snake. Makunaima thrust out his torso glinting with heroism and charged at the monster. Capet swung her maw wide, and out came a swarm of apiacas. Makunaima beat them back, defeating those marimbondo wasps. The monster lashed out with her tintinabulating tail, but right then a tracua ant bit the hero's heel. Distracted by the pain, he dropped to a crouch, and the tail flew past him, hitting Capet smack in the face. Then she roared even more and struck at Makunaima's thigh. He simply dodged, grabbed a big sharp rock, and thwop, knocked that varmint's head clean off. Her body went writhing away on the current, while the head with those big doe eyes came to kiss the feet of its vanquisher in submission. The hero got scared and hightailed it into the woods with his brothers. And so there's this whole chase scene where this rolling head is just like chasing them all over, and they go up a tree and they throw fruit down at the head. She keeps coming, but they don't know that now she's enslaved to them. But they're afraid of her, so they go and they hide in the shack, and she's knocking on the door, maybe like with her head. And the head waited a long time, but seeing how they really weren't going to open up, she mulled over what she wanted to be. If she became water, others would drink her. If she became an ant, they'd squish her. If she became a mosquito, they'd zap her. If she became a train, she'd get derailed. If she became a river, they'd put her on the map. She made up her mind. I'll go be the moon. Okay, so for this last song before our panel discussion, they'll come back one more time, don't worry. We chose a call and response song that Andrade based on a genre of music he was studying called canto de pedinte, which translates into beggar songs or maybe hobo songs. So in this version, Makunaima tries to bum a cigarette from a young chauffeur, and I imagine it as a kind of blues song. So in my version, let's see if I can. It's kind of hilarious to be doing this, but I mean, when I wrote it, I thought about these. I thought of the melody. So he's going up and he's trying to get a cigarette. He's like, been 3 days since I ate, a whole week since I spit. Adam was made of dirt, you dig. Come on, nephew, give me a cig. Chauffeur replies, awful sorry, kin of mine, but I can't spare a smoke. Paper, match, and all the fillings fell in the water, done got soaked.
This is so nice. We've been talking about this because, actually, Andrade took like these forms from Brazilian folk music from different parts of the country, and then it was very, very clever from Katrina to do that, to put it in these traditional melodies. But when I started doing this version, musical version, I was telling her I made it. I tried to do it as Mario did with the legends, like take it out of the map, like the
Yeah, and taking songs from, like, his are very traditional, you know, they're based on traditional melodies, but you kind of remixed what he was remixing, right?
Exactly,
and did your
exactly.
own.
So
yeah.
I didn't took any traditional melody, so I decided doing my own to remake, like it's my version, it's my musical version. So faz 3 dias que não como, semana que não escarro. O Adão foi feito de barro, se quem me dá cigarro. Faz 3 dias que não como, semana que não escarro. O Adão foi feito de barro, se quem me dá cigarro. Adão foi feito de barro, sobre me dá cigarro. Desculpe meu parente, se cigarro não lhe dou. A paia faz vergonhando, caiu na água e se molhou. Me desculpe meu parente, se eu não lhe dou. A paia faz vergonhando, caiu na água e se molhou. Me desculpe meu parente, se eu não lhe dou. A paia faz vergonhando, caiu na água e se molhou. Me desculpe meu parente, se eu não lhe dou. A paia faz vergonhando, caiu na água e se molhou. Se molhou, se molhou, se molhou, se molhou, se molhou, se molhou. Thank you.
Pode ficar. Você ligou? Ligar atrás, né? Você quer mudar a guitarra?
Well, first of all, that was amazing. Pretty good minute. Thank you, everyone. Again, another thanks for being here. What a wonderful mix of music, literature. Really excited to have this conversation and all things Macunaíma. I know at least one person in the audience is wearing a Macunaíma t-shirt today. So they're fans. I want to maybe just start off by asking Iara, since we just got to hear your wonderful music. And you've been working with Macunaíma for a very long time, and I know that you have this album, Macunaíma Upper Tupi. What inspired you to take this work of literature, which is a canonical Brazilian, modernist, crazy novel, and make an album?
The text itself, actually, because it's the music, all the music were already there at the book, right? So every time you have this and Macunaíma sang, and his brother sang as a lullaby to him. So so the music were all there, and besides that, there is the fact that that Mário de Andrade was also a musician, a poet, and he did a very important work with traveling through the country and doing the first registros.
Recording. He was like an Alan Lomax figure. So he was the first minister, the founding minister of the Department of Culture in São Paulo. So he had access to all these funds and went around recording, both writing but recording folk music from northeastern Brazil.
Yeah, what I want to say is that he was a very musical person. Like he wrote as he was composing a song most of the time. And in this book, you can see this. Like in the very beginning of the book, you have this periods. No fundo do mato virgem, nasceu Macunaíma, herói da nossa gente. Era preto retinto e filho do medo da noite. So it's not poetry, it's prosa.
It's prose.
It's prose, but you can feel the rhythm. It's clear, it's pretty clear, and music is rhythm, first of all. So as I was in college, I started reading this book for the second time, and then at the very beginning, it was like the music starts playing on my mind. So I started doing this work, and then I started at 1998. And then in 2008, I released the album, Macunaíma Opera Tupi, which unfortunately I don't have.
The CD is sold out. I know. We were like,
anymore.
Can you bring some merch?
Although it'd be ideal if we could buy it, but it is streaming on Spotify.
Sure, everywhere. It's on streaming every platforms. So and then I also did the piece,
a stage performance.
Yeah, the stage performance, the opera. Twice, one in 2010 in Teatro Oficina, very important theater place in São Paulo, and then in 2019 with Jaider Isbel, the artist who made the cover, the book's cover. He's a Makushi artist that unfortunately he has passed away like about 2 years ago, but he was a Makushi artist, visual artist, not just visual artist, but very important and very brilliant. And he was from the same original people of the myth, Macunaíma's myth. So it's with Makushi. And Taurepan, the people, né? Aricuna, Taurepan, Wapixana, and Makushi. And I had this great honor to have him also on this show, on this opera. And I've been playing all these songs for the last 15 years. And it's always something magical, because I felt like it was Mário de Andrade's wish, because after I had already started composing the songs, I found document from him at at como que chama?
The archive.
Yeah, the archive
at the University of São Paulo.
Yes, exactly. And saying, and the name was Macunaíma Opera in 6 parts. And so I don't know if you have already read the book, but he dies into Iara's mouth.
Spoilers. It's more complicated. And Iara, her name is the name of a mythical kind of siren, like seductive water creature. It depends on what tradition it's coming from. But
Yeah.
she could be a snake. She could be kind of like a mermaid.
Yeah, usually people say, it's beautiful, Iara.
But Iara
he's
causes
a
his
monster.
downfall.
Iara is a monster. Okay.
We'll definitely come back to questions of rhythm because as a reader of the English translation, I was so taken by the rhythms. But I wanted to ask both Katrina and John a question. As you're both translators of Portuguese, but you're U.S.-based, American-raised thinkers and writers, and I know that in Brazil, my experience, just when I tell people like, oh, I'm reading Macunaíma, it doesn't matter who the Brazilian person is. They're like, yes, I know that. I know that book. It's a book that it seems like all Brazilians seem to have read in school and know, but it's not so well known here. And it was a very interesting, strange reading experience for me. I loved it. But I'm curious if you could both speak to your first encounter with this book, which might have been a while ago, and what did you make of this when you first encountered it? What captivated you? What interested you about it?
Yeah, I first read it when I was living in Rio de Janeiro in 2004. I'd been living there for almost a year, and I was teaching English and taking classes just on my own. Mostly to get a visa to stay in the country, but I was taking Portuguese, and then they said you have to take a minimum of 3 classes to enroll here. So then I took a kind of media studies class and then a Brazilian literature course. And so I first read Macunaíma in that course. So it was presented to me as this kind of national novel, this kind of, I call it a patchwork portrait of Brazilian identity. It's mixing so many things. And at the time, I probably understood maybe 30% of the words in the book. But I think it's actually easier for a foreigner to read it because you don't expect to know all the words. For Brazilians, there are a lot of words, not just indigenous words, but African words from Kimbundu, from Yoruba, that are just, it's just kind of like this soup, but there's always the rhythm. And so when I read it, I just felt like, I thought it was really funny. I thought it was just really compelling. I could feel the music in it. I didn't quite understand it, but I felt that it was reaching deep into something really important about Brazilian culture, about mixed race cultures in general, definitely in the Americas. And so it really spoke to me, but I felt that I didn't really understand it. And so I think translating it so many years later is part of my attempt to try to understand it on a deeper level. But like many things that are so complex and still read to this day, I feel like I still can't make up my mind about what it's about. Or even things that I like or dislike about it. So, yeah.
When I came to his work, I first read he wrote a landmark collection of poetry called Poesia Desvelada, which is hallucinated Sao Paulo. And I came across that in the library. I was working at MIT, and was just looking on, during lunchtime, going through the shelves, looking at the books I hadn't read, and I saw, Hallucinated City, I think it was called, was translated Sao Paulo. And I opened it up, and it was Maria Andrade, and I didn't know who he was. So I read that book in English, and then I said, let me go back and try to read the Portuguese. And it was a revelation, right? Because it's a sort of a book that's playing with turn-century themes, right? The Harlequin is there, but also it's a profound work of modernism. He declaimed parts of this in Sao Paulo, and it caused an uproar. So after that, I said I have to try to find more work by Maria Andrade, and then of course I came across Macunaíma, and I heard there was a film, but I couldn't see the film. So then I said, I'll read the English first. And then I went to the Portuguese, and like you, I barely understood it. But I will say that going back to the Portuguese and then reading your translation and your version of your translation, one of the things that I think I say in my introduction is I praise you immensely because you have done a great service to English language readers, but also to Maria Andrade. Your mic's not working. Oh.
Or did it fall?
It's not working. Okay, so did you all? Did everyone? You heard most of it, right? Okay, good. Good. Yes. So that's good. But yes. But it's one of those books. I mean, and it's interesting because Brazilian literature has these some of these extraordinary writers, people who have basically, in a sense, remade Portuguese. You, of course, translated another one, Clarice Lispector. I translated Juan Deus, right? There's, of course, Guimarães Rosa, and any number of them. And they're not well known here. And so one of my great hopes is that with this book and with other books, right, that with, for example, your Lispectors, but especially with this one, that Maria Andrade is better known.
I think that one of the things that strikes me, I asked this question about an early encounter because I think that we're going to have a lot of readers who are going to be encountering this book for the first time, and it is a really strange book where I think you've done a tremendous job in terms of, I mean, every page I was like, what was that in the Portuguese? It's just so mind-blowing. Some of the language is so juicy in this book, I guess, is the thing. But I think it's also that it is a strange reading. For me, it was a very strange reading experience. And it was both, you were talking about the unknown, like that it's a book you can't actually fully grasp, I think, and that's part of like this amazing friction of reading it and this undecidability. I think there was something in the, one of the pieces of writing of Mario de Andrade's preface that he didn't publish, but or I think in your afterword you say like he himself was uncertain what to make of this book. Is it a masterpiece? Is it not?
He called it a failed masterpiece.
So it's like he was wavering. I think like it's not a judgment, is it good or bad kind of thing, but there's this kind of instability of feeling. I think for me when I was reading this book, that was so interesting, and I imagine so as a translator that gives you a lot to work with. This is this is a question that you might actually not want to answer, but I want to ask it. But it's fine. The question is really just because I know that this translation, when you're reading it, like I imagine that there must have been so much joy in translating this because the language is just Looney Tunes sometimes. Literally, like there's yeehaws and yada yada yadas in it, and like I imagine like searching for that, it's both painstaking work but also like really joyful. But it's very clear also that you had a very difficult task, especially because there are these words from indigenous languages and African languages, and that in the same way that Mario de Andrade was an ethnographer, ethnologist, like you have to do that work also, right, to translate. And so I know that there must have been like real difficulties. The question is really just, were there moments in the translation where you just had to give up?
I couldn't ever not translate something. And I think there are certain people who think that leaving something in the original is not translating. But I think, especially with a book that stages untranslatability and a kind of multilingualness within what seems to be a single language, that leaving certain things in the original, it's part of interpreting how that feels in the book. And I did, like the painstaking, really kind of like tiring, sometimes exciting, but very tiring kind of scholarly part was researching every word and reference in the book. And there are a lot of scholarly texts in Brazil that were helpful to me, but I also had to do a lot of my own research or just pull different things together. And when I looked at some of the source materials, which were, ethnographic material of like Amazonian songs, I would see that the ethnographers, they would have the original language and whatever indigenous language, and then they would translate it sometimes or have kind of, like the same line translation. And sometimes they would just give up and say, I don't know what this is. And there are some lines in the book where Andrade took it from the source and just left it in, where someone said, just the ethnographer's like, I don't know what this means. so I guess maybe I'm not claiming responsibility. But I don't know if there was anything that I didn't. I let myself take certain freedoms because the book is, it's very colloquial. It has a very kind of like down-home kind of oral storytelling vibe, and so I did something I never do, which is transpose. So, there's like fit as a fiddle, and you read that and you go, they didn't say that. There's like a fiddle that's so American. Or I translated jacare, which is caiman, as alligator, but who's ever heard a folk tale about a caiman? Who even knows what a caiman is? So, I did some things, but I think in the notes there were a couple songs where like just nobody could figure out. None of my sources had any explanation for what they meant. So when I have a lot of notes that I wrote to go with the book, a lot of framing, and sometimes I would just say like, none of my sources can find this, and then move on. But I wanted to give people a sense that there are a lot of mysteries still in the book. Yeah. And one thing I want to say that we were talking about the other day about, you were mentioning instability. There's so much instability of language, but also of identity and gender. And he mixes Portuguese is a gendered language, but he says aso, like feminine for the sun. And then the hero gets to the city of São Paulo, and he calls like the machine, he calls it a goddess, then he calls it a god, and it's just, I think Mario de Andrade himself, to me, this could not, you just feel that this was written by a mixed race person who is also queer, but a little bit uncomfortable, a lot uncomfortable with his sexuality and his racial background. And I think also as a mixed race person, I really felt that, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but just like, you feel a lot of that conflict in the book, but also this idea that no category or no boundary is completely fixed. So he plays a lot with that messiness. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's part of the intentions of the book, actually. And I would like to say that for Brazilian people, it's not easy to read this book, too. Yeah, it's not like, we understand every word. No, it's super crazy. Yeah, for me, like, it is. It's big. That's why it is so revolutionary, I guess. It is. The book was shocked, like the society. And it was almost 100 years ago it was written, right? Yeah. So it was the way he writes is unique, I guess. And then there are all these words that we don't understand. That is not Portuguese at all. It's Yoruba and Bantu and Tupi Guarani and many original languages, but it has always this music on it, this repetition of words, and so it makes like sometimes you don't understand everything, but you just goes through the reading.
Yeah, I think what struck me about it is that on the one hand, there's and it's in the translation, there are a lot of words that are not untranslated words, but as you said, that's in the original also. The original work is also a translation, or there's cultural translations of different forms in the original. And on the one hand, there might be this difficulty of not being able to grasp it all, but yet it has this velocity. It's like a picaresque in a way. It's like there's this adventure story, and so there's a way in which, like what Iara, what you were saying about the rhythms, you just keep going. It's like a very high-flying novel for a lot of it, and so I think that, to me, that was so interesting. The part and also, let's be also really clear, this is a book where there's a lot of sexual violence. there's like racial issues because you've got the 3 races of Brazil coming together. There are there's a lot of violence, right? There's a lot that's maybe troubling, right? And it's so interesting though the way that all of that, the way that you kind of go with it.
A lot of it comes from the myths and the folk tales that it's based on,
right.
too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, and so it's and that's a really interesting aspect of it. So it's not like it's not the writer, the narrator it's not his particular viewpoint. But I think that's part of what you were describing. I think around like the slipperiness of identity and I wonder if in the language, like going back to like rhythm and language. It's a book that is also about language, right? About, there's many moments in the book where this is thematized, where there's this idea of like, first of all, it's hilarious how the language sometimes registers, like it shifts registers within the same sentence. And it's just kind of all over the place. And so that's also part of the joy and velocity of it. But I think it's also, there's a way in which, there's a moment when Macunaíma is jealous of like the giant who's a collector of like gems and stones.
This is his nemesis who has found the muriquita, the magic amulet. So he's trying to get the amulet, the muriquita, back from the cannibal giant.
The cannibal giant's like a collector, and Macunaíma is sad because he's like, I'm not a collector. But then he's like, but why would I collect stones? Because stones are also like wasps and humans, and like there's this kind of really interesting flora fauna thing happening around like the connection to nature, and then Macunaíma's like, I'm gonna collect foul words, like bad words. He's like, that's my joy, right? And so like there's this like exuberant like interest in language, and I wonder if any of you could talk about that, just what's happening with language in this book.
Well, so one of the things I think that is remarkable about this book is Andrade's engaging in different strategies for telling a story about Brazil. And it's not, on one hand, it could be read as a national story, but I think he's also pushing back against that. It is a novel written in mythic modes, right? And I love how you mentioned that so much of the violence comes from these myths, because of course if we think about Greek and Roman myths, for example, or fairy tales, like the violence is in all of those, and we kind of cartoons, right? And we read right past it, or look right past it, and kind of accept it. And so I think he's playing with all of that. But in terms of language, I mean, I feel like his interest in language as a poet really comes through here, because part of it is the rhythm, but part of it is bringing language into being. What happens when you juxtapose all of these, I mean, there's those passages where it's just this profusion. It's a kind of excess or surfeit or surplus, right? And you can't fully, I mean, even whether you're reading it in Portuguese or English, you can't keep it all in your head. But in that juxtaposition, it's almost like it's creating something new. And I feel like he's doing this, it's engaging in this process of creation and transformation continuously, which is part of that antic movement forward. There's this constant movement forward, because one of the things about Macunaíma that you start to love is he never stops, right? No matter what happens to him, right? He's bitten by these ants, or he's transformed, or I mean whatever. Well, I'm not going to give it all away, but.
He dies several times and is resurrected. Yeah.
Right, exactly. One part of him does not age the way the other part does. So the other parts do. Right. So you can't read it literally, right? But then what Andrade I think is trying to get us to do is to accept this process of creation and transformation, which in a sense is his way of saying, this is Brazil. This is true to Brazil. This is not the true Brazil, but this is a series of truths.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that you can go farther and say this is true of culture, this is true of any nation. And one thing I'll just add is that I did not expect to go so deep into U.S. American culture and language when I was translating this. So to kind of get some of that very colloquial, a little bit old-timey, kind of funny language. I was watching like 1930s screwball comedies and old gangster films and writing down. Like, it was the fun part was like writing in my notepad in my phone, like all these. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna use that. Oh, good. Like His Girl Friday. I was watching Coen Brothers movies and like old cartoons, and then reading Mark Twain and Faulkner, Zora Neale Hurston. There's actually at least one folk tale that's in Macunaíma that also appears in Mules and Men. So her ethnography, where she's collecting African American folk tales in Florida. So that was, and they're both based on a European fairy tale about like someone who's like outrunning the devil on a horse. So that was actually a really kind of surprising and fun part. And I had this collection, an anthology of American folklore, and I was taking all kinds of bits of language. So, and like things that maybe like your grandmother said, or just like, when we're kids, we just absorb all of this language. So I was just remembering. So I hope people have fun just kind of remembering old phrases you don't think of, or words for mosquitoes you never thought of before, like mitsies, marangoons, skeeters. Yeah.
Well, one thing I just want to say is you also, this is sometimes the most difficult thing, you are able to take things that are seemingly simple and fine, but actually quite a challenge, and render them in English. So like, ay, preguiça, right,
So many versions of I keep preguiça.
Yeah,
Like, I can't be bothered, I don't really want to, I'm so lazy, I'm just so lazy.
Yeah.
I say it a lot now.
So I want to ask one more question, and then maybe we'll take a question or two from the audience. So I think that what you just said about the like Americanisms, I mean, that was, I think, part of like the true joy. I really, it was so fun. I just was laughing out loud. I was texting people like, look at this phrase. When was the last time you heard Sunday Fun Day?
Domingo Pedro Cachimbo.
And so it was just, it was really, it felt very present to me as an American, a U.S. American reader. And one of the things I'm thinking about is the fact that this book was first published in 1928, right? And so it's 95 years old. And, and thinking about like, well, why did this book resonate for me reading it in 2023 in the US? And I guess, I'll say like one thing that really, and it really did, which is, it surprised me. I think I said this publicly as well as to you. I knew that this would be a really, really well done translation. I just did not know the degree to which I would love, love, love reading this book. And I feel like this book does this thing where it's like watching Saturday morning cartoons. It's like you're just having so much fun. But then at the end, I got so emotional. It's so, like, because when you think about what's underlying all of this, there's a lot at stake, and it is about Brazil, and it's about, like, these different cultures, and for me, part of what resonates for me is that there's just something about the worldview of, Macunaíma from the forest. Like, there's these moments of cultural translation of, like, going to Sao Paulo and seeing the city from the perspective of the forest, right? Seeing the machines as, like, gods and goddesses, but also seeing the emptiness of the city and the wonder of the city. And so there's these commentaries on modernity, and there's this moment towards the end, I won't give it away, but there's a real sadness that comes after you've been in this world that's so animated, right? If you think about the mythological worlds where like everything is alive, the ants are creatures that could also be humans. The moon is this, someone decided to become the moon instead of becoming an ant, right? And so it feels like a world full of company, animated, and then you feel like the loneliness of our world. And there's something about that for me today, thinking about like also just not in any direct way, but thinking about the world that we inhabit, climate crisis, and our connection to other beings. And I don't know, so for me, like that felt not like that was the main point of the book, but it was like deeply resonant for me. I'm curious for you all, in terms of like thinking about this book today, like what might this book offer our readers here? or for you, like today?
Well, I think it's as you said, it's still contemporary. It still makes sense, and that's amazing, because I think it has a subject issue too. So it touches us like in our soul, in our. It is also about existence. It's like I'd like to say that it's the Brazilian Odyssey. Odyssey.
The Odyssey.
Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brazilian
Yeah.
Odyssey. Mm-hmm. So it's the trip that a human being makes since he's born to his death, and what is this? What happens between? So it's universal at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing what you were saying about how there's so much kind of life in the story, and there's so much, you have so many. I looked up so many species of animals and plants from the Amazon. Like, my Google searches were crazy, but a lot of tropical diseases also. But toward the end, it all kind of, it dwindles, and you have a single parrot telling the story of Macunaíma, and it's a lost language, a lost people. So there's a definite melancholy in the book, and I think for me, yeah, the book was written 100 years ago, and it's interesting because I think it's not the virtuous book and the virtuous author that people want today. It's not a book that's going to tell you how to live and think about culture in the most responsible way, but it's really, really complex and wise about all of these kind of intractable conflicts that happen when you have, in the Americas, especially Brazil and US, these countries that were, built on European colonization, displacement of indigenous peoples, slavery, and ways and ways of immigration. And so you have this just kind of like complete tangle, and there's a lot of anguish in that, but there's also a lot of richness. You have all of this culture that comes when you have all these different traditions mixing together in new ways. And so that's what I think, that it's a very melancholy book, but it's both, pessimistic and optimistic. And I think a lot of that is still true today. And that's why I think, even though it's such a Brazilian book, I think that people in the US will recognize some of these kind of impasses, or these quandaries that are still with us today, of how do you have all these people united under one flag, and what does it all mean? And sometimes you're like, oh, this is amazing, and sometimes you just kind of want to crawl under a rock, and that's how the book makes you feel.
Beautifully said, both of you.
Like a couple of minutes, maybe for one or two quick questions. Anyone?
And we'll come over to you with a microphone if you raise your hand.
Thank you. Hi, Katrina. My first memory of you, actually, that I carry with me since forever, since I met you in San Francisco, it was like you saying, "Ay, que preguiça."
It's the hero's catchphrase.
Yeah. I think my question, because I mean, it makes so much sense for me, especially after tonight, that you translated Clarice and also Macunaíma, because Clarice, although it has a different work with the language, is also something that, like, most of the time, for me as a reader, defies meaning. So it's almost something that kind of like involves you. It's kind of like a magical thing that is happening, and it's almost like casting a spell. So I think my question is more like in the translation, and as a translator, what are the things that you think, if not, that you think that Clarice taught you that helped you translating Macunaíma?
Oh, I've never thought about that. Usually people say, they're so different, what brings them together? And that I can answer is that it's the language. It's the amazing language. But, her work is so psychological and spiritual, existential, philosophical. Macunaíma is like epic or folklore. It's all external action. And it's not really what we imagine a novel to be, with all of this like character development. But it is like almost like the psychology of a culture. But the main thing it gave me was confidence, because it took me 2 years to translate the complete stories, and I thought that was the hardest thing I've ever done. If I can do that, I can do Macunaíma, because I used to think, oh, someone's got to retranslate this. There's a translation from 1984 that is not really usable. It has a lot of issues with it and doesn't really capture the music of the book. And so, I was teaching it, I wanted to teach the book in graduate school to my undergrad comparative literature courses, but I couldn't find a good translation, so I just taught the movie. And so I said, someone should translate this, but that's going to take a whole lifetime. Like, someone else can do it. Ninguém merece. It's like, no one deserves it. No, like, no one deserves to do that. But I think after I translated the Clarice, I thought, okay, my Portuguese is good. Okay, my English is good. Like, I can do this. And so I pitched it, to New Directions, thinking it would take me a year. And then 6 years later, here's the book. Yeah, but I think that's, just like, yeah.
Hi. I'm really curious I want to hear more about the untranslatable or decisions you made when you kept a word as is. And I can imagine in places when it's like an indigenous plant but I like that idea a lot, because I'm thinking I have parents who come from two different places, and when they decide to bring a word in that is like of where they are from, it can happen. It's not necessarily they don't know the word in English, but they're just like making a decision sometimes to bring it in. And that made me think of that. And so I was curious if you can, not necessarily parallel, but if there's any related thought involving that.
It's something I try not to do, actually. I try to translate everything, so I think you have to have a really specific reason to not translate something. Because I think sometimes we translate our English, we're like, oh, but the word is so perfect, it's untranslatable. Saudade, it's just saudade. But you can say, like nostalgia, missing somebody. Yeah, but when Madhu was talking earlier, I'll just read you one. I think there's a lot of music in these words. So for here, it's like sometimes it was a moment where it's really supposed to be a mysterious incantation in another language, or it's a religious song, which you're going to hear in a moment, or it's just the music of the words. So when they get to São Paulo and they see all of the skyscrapers and big buildings, they understand them in terms of palm trees. So it says, the brothers entered a savannah full of palm trees. Inajás, uricuris, ubusus, bacabás, mucajás, miritis, tucumãs. So you can't, if you translate, it's like poetry, you can't, what's important there is the sound of the words, and also that he's bringing the forest to the city. So, yeah.
So I think we should end our panel. So I want to just say we're going to hear another song. And then we're going to have a reception with some snacks, refreshments, books for sale. So enjoy the music, and we'll see you outside.
And yeah, while the band's setting up, I just want to thank everybody for making this celebration possible, including my fellow panelists and Iara and the band, Center for Fiction, especially Melanie and Eliana. And all this extravagance could not have been possible without the Consulate General of Brazil in New York. Obrigadíssima. Yeah. And the very generous Brazil Lab at Princeton University and my publisher, New Directions. So, yeah! And I just want to say the Consulate also organized another reading and discussion with scholar and translator Brent Hayes Edwards, who's amazing, at the New York Public Library on May 15th. And then BAM across the street is going to screen the famous 1969 movie together with a documentary about the indigenous roots of Macunaíma, and that's on May 9th. So there's more stuff. And then, so the band's gonna play one last song, and I just wanna say it's a really special song. It's based on the Macumba chapter, in which Macunaíma participates in an Afro-Brazilian religious ritual largely based on candomblé, which is a syncretic Afro-Brazilian religion that people here know Afro-Cuban Santeria. That's the best way to say, it mixes orishas, deities from the West African Yoruba tradition that often have counterparts from Catholicism. They're indigenous spirits. So in the book, it's like kind of a crazy fantasia. It's not anthropology. But this was one of the songs from this chapter. I left it in the original because I realized I wanted to preserve the sounds, the rhythms of the very fast like kimbundu with the more kind of like slower rhythm of Yoruba. And then I realized, like we were talking about, a lot of this religion has to do with mystery and the secret. And so to me, it was important to have this incantation be a little bit more of a secret. So that's it.
you very much. Muito obrigada. Grande prazer, uma grande honra e uma grande alegria. Nós que somos Macunaíma Girls. I'm playing tomorrow at Mubu. You're very welcome to see us playing and this and maybe I think other songs actually. And thank you very much. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, should we do it in the book?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, arrasou, arrasou. E aí, loucura, loucura.
Loucura, loucura.